The mop water was still warm when I heard him say it. Make sure she stays out of the showroom. Customers don't like her type lingering. I didn't flinch, just kept mopping like the background noise I'd been all day. That's what I was to them. Background. Something to step around, something beneath their notice. But that manager? The one with the polished loafers and cheap authority? He had no clue I signed his paycheck. He thought I was the help. And to him, the help meant someone disposable, someone forgettable. There's a strange kind of power in being invisible. You hear everything. You see how people act when they think no one's watching, or worse, when they think the only person watching doesn't matter. By the third time he barked at me to move my bucket, I had memorized the names on every office door and every employee who didn't hold it open. I caught the eye of a young sales associate. He looked away, quickly. Not because he didn't care, but because looking too long meant recognizing something wrong, and most people would rather not bother. I swept the same hallway twice. Not because it needed it, but because what I overheard needed to be heard again. Confirmation, not imagination. Why do they always send these types? He laughed, holding a clipboard like it made him important. She's not here to clean, she's probably casing the place. You know how they are. They. Like I was a category, not a person. I paused next to the coffee station, empty of both coffee and humanity, and glanced at the reflection in the glass. I didn't look like a threat. I looked tired. I looked like someone who'd been up since 4 a.m., someone who carried herself like she didn't want trouble. Which, to be fair, I didn't. But trouble doesn't wait for permission. Sometimes it calls you by the name it thinks you deserve. You don't belong in here, he said again, not even bothering to lower his voice. Keep her out of view when we've got real clients walking around. What makes a person think they can speak that way about another human being? Not just once, not in private, but loudly, proudly, in front of others. I kept cleaning. I kept pretending not to hear. But inside, I was taking notes. Mental check marks. Every insult, every smirk, every dismissal. All of it was adding up. 5 minutes. That's how long it took for them to show me exactly who they were. And they had no idea who I was. They thought I was just the janitor. They were half right. I was the janitor. I was also their boss. And one of them was about to lose everything. If you're still watching, hit that subscribe button. You're not going to want to miss what happens next. And in the comments, tell me, what country are you watching from right now? I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. They say if you want to know how people truly are, strip away everything that makes them behave. Take away the boardroom, the suits, the introductions. What's left is the truth. That's what I came looking for. No entourage, no heads up, just me, a gray uniform, a mop cart, and a clipboard that might as well have been invisible. That morning, I walked into the dealership just as the sun was rising. No one greeted me at the door. No hello, no you must be with maintenance. Not even a glance. It's strange, the way people look through you when they think you don't belong. One salesman walked right past me and let the door shut in my face. Twice. I started sweeping the tiled showroom floor, slow and methodical. Not because it was dirty, but because the culture was. I was there to observe what HR complaints couldn't capture in words. The tone, the body language, the little things that add up to something massive. The dealership had been flagged 3 times in 2 quarters. High turnover for minority staff. Disproportionately low service provided to non-white customers. Anonymous reports of hostile work environment. But everything had been brushed off, labeled as misunderstandings. No action taken. So I came to see for myself. Within the first hour, it was obvious who got treated with warmth and who got the cold shoulder. A white couple walked in, looking unsure. 3 employees greeted them before they reached the receptionist. Laughter, coffee offers, handshakes. 15 minutes later, a black man with his teenage son entered. I watched from behind a glass partition. No one moved. One guy looked up, then turned back to his phone. They stood at the front desk, waiting like they were invisible. The receptionist finally looked up, frowned, and asked if they were in the right place. I made a note. The guy in charge, the same manager who made the crack about me lingering, was named Chad Redding. Wore his authority like it was cologne, strong and overpowering. He walked fast, barked orders without context, and smiled only when customers looked like they had perfect credit. He passed me 3 times and never once acknowledged I existed. But I existed, and I was documenting everything. The thing is, I've been the only black woman in a lot of rooms. Rooms full of men who didn't believe I earned my seat. Rooms where my voice had to be sharper, firmer, more exact just to be heard. I thought I was used to it. I thought I'd built enough armor over the years. But something about being reduced to nothing, it was different. When I stood in front of this dealership, I thought about how much it cost to build, how many zeros were in that investment, how I signed off on the floor plan, approved every design, and selected that exact shade of silver for the brand wall. And yet, here I was, being talked over, brushed aside, treated like a problem. I kept cleaning, I swept corners that were already spotless, I picked up papers no one dropped, because every second they ignored me, they told me exactly who they were. And I was listening, not with my ears, but with my power. They didn't see it coming, and when it did, it wouldn't feel like justice. It would feel like a consequence. This wasn't my first time going undercover. It was the fourth. But this one felt different from the moment I stepped onto the lot. There was something about this place. The silence had a tone. You felt it before anyone spoke. Not just indifference, something colder, more dismissive. I chose dealership number 42 for a reason. It had all the red flags, high-performing on paper, but with reports of discriminatory behavior buried under layers of polished numbers. Sales were strong, but the breakdown was skewed. Black and Latino customers came in often, but very few bought. Complaints were vague but eerily consistent, being talked down to, steered away from high-end models, ignored unless accompanied by someone white. From HQ, it looked like a staffing issue. From the street, it looked like a pattern. The moment I walked in, I was invisible. Not metaphorically, literally. One receptionist looked up, saw my uniform, and looked straight through me. Another muttered something about cleaning staff showing up too early. No, good morning. No eye contact, like I was a smudge on the glass. I started in the service bay, wiping down counters that didn't need wiping. The techs were decent, not overly warm but respectful enough. One even offered me water. But once I crossed into the sales floor, the air shifted. A young black woman came in around 10:15. Mid-30s, well-dressed, confident. She asked about test driving the new electric SUV. I paused mid-sweep just to watch. The salesman didn't even offer his name, just asked if she had financing pre-approval. She blinked, said yes. Asked about features. He gave clipped answers, never made eye contact. Then handed her a brochure and said the car was a bit premium for first-time buyers. She walked out. 15 minutes later, a teenage white boy walked in with his father. He got a test drive in 5 minutes and left with 3 business cards and a water bottle. The math didn't lie. The behavior didn't either. I made a note of the time. Then I saw him, Chad Redding, the man who'd insulted me earlier. Slim build, dress shirt tucked too tight, and a voice that traveled further than it needed to. He was talking to a middle-aged white couple, all smiles and fake charm. Said he could knock $2,000 off the list price just for showing up today. Full service included. White glove delivery. The works. When the couple left, his smile vanished instantly. He turned to a nearby black employee and barked something about filing papers faster. The employee nodded, said nothing. I kept mopping. Chad passed me without a glance, then stopped, turned back, and actually snapped his fingers. "Miss, can you not mop here right now? Some of us are trying to sell cars." He didn't wait for a response. He just walked off like my existence was an inconvenience. I kept my head down and kept working, but my hands gripped the mop tighter than necessary. This was the environment he ran, and judging by the comfort in his tone, he didn't think he was doing anything wrong. That was the scariest part. Not the behavior, but the certainty. The certainty that no one would ever call him out, that no one watching could do anything about it. There was something about the way people spoke when they thought you didn't matter. They didn't whisper. They didn't watch their words. There was no hesitation. Just unchecked thoughts pouring out like they belonged in the room. That was Chad Redding's specialty, saying the quiet part loud. He strutted across the floor like he owned the building, shoulders back, jaw clenched, barking orders like everyone was beneath him. I had seen men like him before. He wasn't new, he was just comfortable. And comfort like that only grows where no one challenges it. At one point, he leaned on a desk and started joking with another manager. Rick, I think his name was. They were talking about a new hire who didn't show up for orientation. "Another one of those diversity hires, I bet," Chad said, not bothering to lower his voice. "They want the job, but can't read the clock." Rick chuckled. Or maybe they realized early they're not built for real work. They both laughed. I gripped the mop tighter. Not because I was shocked, but because I was tired of hearing this recycled hate passed off as banter. As if racism became harmless when dressed up in office casual. Then came the kicker. "You remember that girl we interviewed last week?" Chad asked. "The one with the braids?" Rick nodded. "She was smart. Too smart. I don't trust ones like that. They come in all ambitious, start asking for time off and talking about policy." They both laughed again, as if ambition from a black woman was some kind of inside joke. I stood 3 feet away, mopping the same spot, pretending to focus on a scuff mark that didn't exist. Neither of them looked at me. Not once. They didn't have to whisper. They assumed I couldn't do anything with what I heard. That even if I told someone, it would go nowhere. After all, who listens to the janitor? What they didn't know was that every word was being recorded. Not just by me, but by a small cam hidden inside my mop bucket, something my legal team had cleared weeks ago. Time-stamped, audio-logged, stored off-site. Because with people like Chad, accusations weren't enough. You needed receipts, proof, ironclad evidence. Otherwise, it was just another misunderstanding. And I wasn't collecting misunderstandings, I was gathering the truth. Around noon, a young Latina woman came in. She looked nervous, holding a small notebook. Probably had questions. Probably had been saving for months to make that visit. I could see it in the way she hovered near the SUV section, flipping through the brochure like she was studying for a test. No one approached her. She lingered, waited, looked up at the front desk. Still no one. Finally, she walked up to the counter and asked if someone could tell her more about financing options. Chad didn't even look up from his phone. "Prices are on the tag," he said flatly. "We don't haggle." She blinked, thanked him quietly, and walked out. No one followed. No one cared. They didn't lose a sale. They lost a person. But to them, she was never a customer. Just a nuisance with brown skin and questions they didn't want to answer. I finished wiping the glass doors after she left. Her fingerprints were still visible. She'd been here, and she deserved better. They all did. This dealership didn't have a customer service problem. It had a people problem. And the air inside? It wasn't just stale. It reeked of entitlement. It was around 1:20 p.m. when he said it. No warning, no hesitation, no sense of shame. I was cleaning near the customer lounge, one of those modern setups with cold leather seats and stale coffee that no one ever refills. The kind of place designed to look welcoming but always feels like you're overstaying your welcome. Chad walked in with a younger employee trailing behind him, clipboard in hand, nervous energy all over his face. "I don't care how well she scored in the interview," Chad said, voice sharp. "She talks too confidently. You give people like that an inch, and next thing you know, they're in HR talking about equity and fairness." The younger guy muttered something about diversity targets, trying to sound neutral. Chad just scoffed. "I'm not babysitting another one of those. We need people who know how to stay in line, not ones who start thinking they're owed something because of circumstances." Circumstances. That word hung in the air like dust. He meant color. He meant background. He meant people like me. And then he turned, looked straight at me, not with recognition, not with curiosity, but with that look people reserve for things they don't want to deal with, like trash bins that overflow or street vendors who call out too loudly. "You missed a spot," he snapped, pointing to an invisible stain on the floor. I nodded. Quiet, calm, neutral, exactly the way he expected me to be. As I leaned down to swipe at nothing, he muttered under his breath, loud enough for the other guy to hear, not loud enough for accountability. "Bet she's not even legal." The words hit like a slap. Not because they were new, but because of how casually they came out, like breathing. I froze for just a second, just long enough to memorize the moment. His tone, his posture, the way the other guy didn't laugh, didn't correct him, just adjusted his tie and looked away. That silence, that was the agreement. That was complicated. I straightened up and locked eyes with Chad just for a second. He didn't flinch, neither did I. That moment told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't just careless. He wasn't just crude. He was confident that nothing he said could come back to bite him. Because in his mind, I was nobody. That's the kind of man who ruins lives slowly. Not with one big act, but with 1,000 little ones. Gatekeeping, gaslighting, grinning while closing doors in your face and acting like it's just company policy. He moved past me without a second glance, tapping on his phone like I wasn't even there. But I was there. I was watching. And now I wasn't just documenting. I was waiting. Because every time he opened his mouth, he handed me more proof. Not just of his racism, but of the kind of leadership that poisoned everything under it. And I knew then, it wasn't going to stop. People like Chad never stop on their own. They have to be stopped. And I already knew how this story would end. I just hadn't written the final line yet. By mid-afternoon, I'd stopped pretending to clean. The mop was still in my hands. The cart was still rolling beside me. But my focus had shifted completely. I was no longer collecting filth from the floors. I was collecting evidence. Most people don't notice what's staring them in the face when they think it holds no value. That was my advantage. No one looked twice at my cart. No one questioned the blinking green light tucked just below the handle. A micro lens. Wide angle. High definition. The kind of device that made corporate attorneys nervous and accountability departments curious. We'd tried the internal investigation route before. Nothing stuck. Managers like Chad always had explanations that sounded professional. Miscommunication, cultural misunderstanding, misaligned expectations. But cameras don't misunderstand anything. They don't miss the tone in a man's voice when he mocks a Nigerian accent for laughs in the break room. They don't miss the way a black customer is told a luxury vehicle might be more than they're ready for, while a white customer gets offered a complimentary extended test drive. They don't miss the casual cruelty, the unspoken rules, the smiles that vanish the second skin color enters the equation. At 2:07 p.m., the footage caught a conversation that almost made me drop the mop. Rick, Chad's second-in-command, was joking with two sales reps. The topic? How to spot a time waster. A time waster, according to them, was code for any customer who didn't look like money. You can tell right away, Rick said, grinning. No watch, no manicure, accent too thick. They're not buying. Another rep laughed and added, or if she's a single black mom asking too many questions. Laughter. No shame. Just open conversation about racial profiling like it was part of the training manual. And the worst part? It probably was. This place didn't just have a few bad apples, it had a full tree rooted in arrogance. Every minute I spent inside those walls made it clearer. This wasn't ignorance. It was intent. I panned the camera slowly across the showroom, making sure to catch faces, voices, and interactions. Not for revenge. For accountability. For every customer they'd shamed into leaving. For every employee who kept their head down to keep their paycheck. For every qualified applicant whose resume was tossed after a glance at the name. There was one moment that stuck with me more than the rest. A middle-aged black man came in alone. Dressed neatly, quiet confidence. He asked about the latest model sedan and whether there were any deals for veterans. Rick looked him up and down. Didn't ask what branch, didn't offer a seat. Just pointed to the pricing sheet and said, "Everything you see is final. No handouts today." The man didn't argue. He just nodded slowly and walked out with dignity intact, but pride bruised. I followed him to the door and held it open. He looked at me and smiled like he understood. He didn't know who I was, but he knew I was watching. And maybe that was enough for now, because watching meant witnessing, and witnessing was the first step toward change. They thought they were safe because I wore gloves and carried bleach. But beneath the gloves was power, and behind the bleach was evidence. I didn't come to expose them, they exposed themselves. All I had to do was press record. By 4:58 p.m., the air in the showroom was lighter. Not because anything had changed, but because I knew it would. I wheeled my cart toward the back hallway, the one most customers never saw, past the maintenance closets and HR's barely used office. I stepped into a small supply room, pulled the door shut behind me, and checked my phone. Signal strong. The connection was live. One tap, and the stream from the hidden camera began uploading to the secure folder shared with my legal team and executive assistant. But this time, I wasn't just uploading footage, I was making a call. The ringtone buzzed once before a familiar voice answered. "Everything clear?" my assistant asked. "Yes, they're watching," I replied. "Boardroom's been locked in since noon." Good. That meant they'd seen everything. Every slur, every insult, every customer disregarded, every employee too afraid to speak up. No one could say it was exaggerated or misunderstood. This wasn't a complaint. This was proof. And now it was time to stop observing. Time to shift. I stepped out of the closet and walked back toward the floor, mop left behind. This time I didn't hunch my shoulders. I didn't bow my head or avoid their eyes. I walked like I did in every other boardroom I'd ever owned. Like someone whose name wasn't on a name tag, but on the deed. Chad didn't even look up at first. He was too busy laughing at something on his phone, leaning over the reception desk while a young black woman waited patiently for anyone, to acknowledge her presence. I stood just behind him. He didn't notice. The receptionist did. Her eyes widened slightly, not in recognition, but in confusion. There was something in my posture she couldn't reconcile with the uniform. And then Chad turned, saw me standing there, arms crossed, gaze steady. His smile evaporated. "Can I help you?" he asked, squinting slightly, the first sign of doubt cracking through his smug exterior. "Yes," I said, calm. "You can start by standing up straight." He blinked. "What?" I didn't repeat myself. The moment stretched. He glanced down at my uniform, trying to make sense of it. You could see it in his eyes, trying to match what he thought he knew about me with what was now standing in front of him, unapologetically unafraid. He chuckled nervously. "Look, I already told you, this isn't a place for loitering." I smiled. The kind that doesn't reach the eyes. Funny, That's not what the deed says. Before he could respond, two figures stepped through the glass entrance. Suits, polished, familiar, corporate from HQ. They didn't say a word. They didn't need to. Their presence alone silenced the room. Employees turned. Phones slid into pockets. The sales floor suddenly remembered how to behave. Chad looked at the men, then back at me. Something finally clicked, and that's when I saw it. Not anger. Not even confusion. Fear. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. No, you've said enough. The silence that followed was heavy. Not the kind that invites peace, but the kind that warns something is coming. The suits from HQ flanked either side of me. Their presence didn't need an introduction. Chad's face went pale, his lips parting slightly as his eyes darted between me and the two executives now standing motionless, waiting for my cue. He straightened his posture, chuckled awkwardly. Okay, what is this? Some kind of audit? His voice cracked, and for the first time all day, he sounded unsure. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I'm Denise Howard, I said, loud enough for the entire showroom to hear. Chief Executive Officer of DH Automotive Group. You work for me. The words landed like a slap. I watched as the blood drained from his face, his throat bobbing as he tried to swallow the truth. Behind me, a few employees stood frozen. One of the salesmen's eyes widened like he'd seen a ghost. Another glanced quickly at Chad, as if silently asking whether to pretend it was a joke or wait for him to give orders. But the orders weren't his to give anymore. Chad stammered, reaching for some twisted form of control. This is ridiculous. You came in here, dressed like that, pretending to be a janitor? No, I said calmly. I didn't pretend. I was the janitor today, and yesterday, and the day before that. I reached into the pocket of my uniform and pulled out the small USB stick I'd prepared earlier that morning. This contains 3 days' worth of surveillance. Every word, every slur, every customer turned away, every staff member too scared to speak up. One of the HQ executives stepped forward and took it from my hand. The other one opened a folder and placed it on the reception desk. Inside were documents already signed. The decision wasn't being made today. It had been made before I walked into that showroom. I turned back to Chad. Effective immediately, you are terminated from your position as regional manager. All company property is to be returned. Your access codes have already been revoked. HR is waiting in the conference room to walk you through your final steps. Chad took a step forward, then caught himself. You can't do this. I've been running this place for 6 years. Yes, I said, voice like steel. And every year, we've received more complaints, more silent resignations, more minority staff pushed out without cause. You've been running it, and running it into the ground. He looked around the room, but no one stepped up to defend him. Even Rick had disappeared into his office, door now shut, blinds pulled. That's how these men operated. Loud when they thought they had backup. Quiet when truth came through the door wearing authority. I didn't mean, Chad began. But you did, I interrupted. And the worst part? You thought you were untouchable. He stood frozen, hands slightly raised as if to defend himself from something that wasn't physical. One of the suits nodded at the front desk assistant. She picked up the phone, quietly calling security. I turned to the floor. For the rest of you, I said, eyes moving from one staff member to the next, what happens next depends on what you do now. You don't have to be part of the problem, but no one here gets to say they didn't know. No one moved, no one spoke. Chad turned away, defeated, as 2 uniformed guards entered the showroom. He didn't argue, he just walked out. And the room felt lighter, not clean. But I'm ready. Chad was gone, but the silence he left behind lingered like cigarette smoke, unwanted, sour, and familiar to anyone who's ever had to swallow mistreatment with a straight face. I stood at the center of the showroom, no mop in hand, no disguise. Just me, standing in the full truth of who I was and what I'd come to do. I turned back toward the front desk. The documents remained open, the termination forms signed and stamped. One of the HQ reps connected a laptop to the central screen that hung above the showroom floor, normally used for monthly sales graphs and welcome slides. Not today. Today it was for playback. He hit play on one of the files from the hidden camera. Chad's voice filled the room, loud, mocking. Keep her out of the showroom. Customers don't like her type lingering. Some employees flinched. You people are all the same. Louder now. The audio sharp, undeniable. Bet she's not even legal. The room went still. I let it play for exactly 1 minute and 30 seconds before nodding for it to stop. That was enough. Everyone had heard it. Everyone had to sit in it. I turned to face the staff again. Some wouldn't meet my eyes. Some did, and looked ashamed. One young woman in the service department wiped the corner of her eye. I came here to see how deep the damage really was, I said. And now I know. I paused. And so do you. A man from parts and inventory, middle-aged white, cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said, voice quiet. "I didn't know it was like that. I mean, I've heard things, but I didn't think." "You didn't want to think," I replied. "Because thinking would mean responsibility. It would mean speaking up, risking something." He looked down, said nothing more. Another voice came from the back, soft but clear. The young black salesman, probably no older than 24. "I knew," he said. "I knew what was happening wasn't right, but I needed the job. I've got a daughter, rent, no backup plan." I nodded. "Survival makes silence tempting," I said, "but silence is how this place got like this." The HQ reps handed out papers, new conduct codes, revised reporting procedures, direct lines to the ethics board. But policies only mattered if people were willing to act, and that's what I told them. "This isn't just about Chad," I said. "He was loud, but some of you were quiet, and quiet can be just as harmful." A long pause followed, the kind that made people sit with themselves. Then the young black salesman stepped forward again. He extended his hand. "Thank you," he said, "not just for firing him, but for seeing us." I shook his hand, and at that moment, I felt the weight shift. Not disappear, but shift, because when you expose a system built on looking away, even one moment of direct eye contact can start to undo it. That dealership would never go back to what it was. Not after today, not after hearing itself on speaker, not after being made to see what it had chosen to ignore. Justice didn't come with shouting, it came with truth. Played at full volume. Apologies started flowing like spilled coffee, quick, messy, and all over the place. Some whispered, some loud, some rehearsed. They came in waves, like everyone suddenly realized their silence might cost them something now. A white receptionist approached me first. Nervous smile, clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. "I never knew it was that serious. If I had known." I looked at her. "You did know," I replied. "You just didn't want to deal with it." Her smile faltered. The apology ended there. Next was one of the salesmen, one of the loud laughers from earlier. "Listen," he started, voice a little too upbeat. "I didn't mean anything by the stuff I said. It was just locker room talk, you know? Nothing personal." I held his gaze. Racism isn't less harmful when it's casual. He shifted uncomfortably. Then came the janitorial crew. 3 of them, all older black and Hispanic women who worked the late shift. They didn't apologize. They nodded. They already knew what this place was, and they'd survived it longer than most. One of them, Gloria, stepped closer. "We looked worse," she said softly, "but we never thought someone like you would walk in and do what you did." I met her eyes. "I didn't come here to play hero," I said. "I came because I was tired of hearing stories like yours and not doing anything about them." She nodded again. That was enough. The guilt from some employees thickened the room. Others lingered at a distance, unsure whether to speak up or stay silent again. One manager asked if there'd be retraining. I told him yes, and that it wouldn't be optional. That's when the difference became clear. Who wanted to understand, and who just didn't want to be next. But one moment stood out. A young white intern, probably fresh out of college, walked up with shaking hands. "I didn't say anything bad," he said. But I didn't stop it either. When I heard them say stuff, I froze. I didn't want to lose my job. I paused. Then so that's the difference between being not racist and being anti-racist. One is passive, the other takes risks. He nodded slowly, swallowing hard. "I want to do better. Then start by doing more." That's all I said, because truthfully, I didn't need their apologies. Not really. Apologies don't fix culture, behavior does. Accountability does. The willingness to sit in discomfort and stay there until something changes, that's what matters. And I didn't come here for pity or to be thanked. I came to pull the curtain back, to make them see what their culture looked like when no one thought it was being recorded, to force a reckoning. Not just with Chad, but with the system that allowed him to flourish for 6 years unchecked. The same system that stays silent when black women are passed over, talked down to, overlooked, and ignored. This wasn't about hurt feelings. This was about harm. And when harm is systemic, it doesn't get cleaned up with flowers and apologies. It gets torn up at the root. There's a strange thing about power. People treat you differently when they know you have it. Suddenly, the laughter is softer, the jokes vanish, and respect appears from nowhere. But what about when power isn't obvious? What happens when they can't see your polo title or read your resume? Today I gave an answer, and it wasn't pretty, because today I wore a uniform, not a designer suit. Today I pushed a mop, not a boardroom agenda. And the difference wasn't subtle. It was devastating. I spent years building my name. Countless hours, meetings, negotiations, my face on magazine covers, invitations to speak on diversity, empowerment, and inclusion. People clapped, praised, called me an example of how far we've come. But strip all that away, take off the mask of power, and what's left is a black woman who's still unwelcome in certain rooms. Today, in that dealership, my accomplishments didn't shield me. My success didn't protect me. None of the things people tell us we need to achieve to finally be treated fairly mattered. Because racism doesn't care how many degrees you have. It doesn't check your LinkedIn profile first. It looks at you and sees only what it expects to see. A problem, a nuisance, a threat. Even in a place I owned, built with my money, my vision, my existence was questioned, my dignity was disposable, all because they didn't recognize me. And without recognition, I lost the privilege of respect. That's the hidden truth people don't talk about enough. That's the mask that falls away when you stop performing power and start existing without apology. It wasn't just Chad. He was loud, yes, but he was also predictable. It was everyone else. The quiet ones who saw me and said nothing. The receptionist who let the door close in my face. The salesman who avoided eye contact because acknowledging me would mean confronting something uncomfortable in themselves. When the mask fell, it didn't reveal new truths. It revealed old ones, deep ones, truths about how easily we deny humanity to people we don't deem important enough. Truths about who gets second chances and who gets written off at first glance. Truths about whose stories matter and whose are dismissed as complaints or exaggerations. I thought back to the countless times I'd walked into rooms feeling the weight of representation. Every word carefully chosen, every smile measured, every opinion strategically softened just to be heard. But what good was representation if the moment I removed the trappings of my success, the world defaulted back to old stereotypes? Justice shouldn't require titles or hidden cameras. It shouldn't need a CEO undercover to expose everyday cruelty. Respect shouldn't depend on whether someone recognizes your power. But it did. And it still does. Today wasn't about me. Not really. It was about all the women who looked like me, who didn't have cameras rolling. It was about every black employee quietly resigned to disrespect because speaking out meant losing a paycheck they couldn't afford to lose. When the mask fell, it showed something undeniable. It showed a system comfortable enough to insult me to my face. But it also showed something else. It showed me how much further we still have to go. Exposure wasn't enough. Firing one racist manager wasn't enough. Not even close. Accountability had to stretch further, deeper, beyond just one dealership or one uncomfortable afternoon. Otherwise, tomorrow another Chad would take his place, and the cycle would begin again. I knew that to break this pattern, something different had to happen. Something proactive, something that didn't just call out racism, but dismantled it at its roots. Within 2 weeks, I authorized undercover audits across every dealership I owned. Each inspection came unannounced, random, and recorded. Employees knew what was happening, but they didn't know when or who to expect. Fear spread quickly, but fear wasn't my goal. Accountability was, because racism hides in comfort, not uncertainty. I needed every person working under my name to know that tolerance of racism wasn't a policy, it was a termination offense. That was step 1. Step 2 was making sure that the change wasn't only reactionary, it had to be preventive. Mandatory anti-racism workshops rolled out company-wide, led by educators who weren't afraid of discomfort. We didn't just talk about diversity, we talked about privilege, about implicit bias, about why some jokes aren't jokes at all. Did everyone welcome it? Of course not, but it wasn't about comfort. It was about confronting realities most preferred to ignore. And then came the hiring changes. HR had a new directive, one I personally oversaw. No more token hires, no more quotas for optics. Instead, we launched genuine initiatives that intentionally recruited and mentored minority candidates, ensuring opportunities weren't just given, but supported. Positions that had once been quietly reserved for friends of management now required transparency, clear criteria, and public accountability. We partnered with local organizations, not just to fill roles, but to rebuild trust with communities we'd previously overlooked or openly disrespected. In short, we replaced the culture of silence and complicity with one of clarity and intentionality. But the change closest to my heart? Something we called the Listening Project. We opened anonymous channels for minority employees and customers to share their experiences without fear of retaliation. Real stories, raw and uncomfortable, filled our inboxes. They spoke of subtle humiliations, quiet dismissals, and deeply buried grievances. Reading them hurt, but ignoring them hurts more. We used those stories, those painful truths, to reshape company policies. We didn't just promise to do better. We made accountability measurable. Promotions were tied to inclusivity. Bonuses depended on equitable customer satisfaction scores. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Still, What surprised me most were the reactions I didn't anticipate. Emails from employees who once stayed quiet, now empowered to speak up because they knew someone was listening. A Latina sales associate wrote, "I finally feel like someone sees me, not just my numbers." An older Black janitor shared, "I've been cleaning dealerships for 20 years. This is the first time someone's asked me what I've seen." That hit hardest. Because hope isn't found in symbolic gestures or diversity statements posted on a wall. It lives in moments when people who felt ignored their entire lives suddenly feel heard, feel visible. Real hope is quiet, powerful, and relentless. Real hope doesn't wait for change, it creates it. I thought back to the woman who left the dealership empty-handed, humiliated, and unseen. I wondered if she knew that someone had noticed, if she knew her story was the reason hundreds like her wouldn't have to experience the same pain again. Maybe she'd never know. But her pain had become the seed of our transformation. That's the thing about hope. Even undercover, it grows. Change doesn't come quietly. Real change echoes through stories told boldly, truths spoken loudly, and actions taken fearlessly. But echoes need voices willing to speak first. Voices willing to risk comfort for justice, safety for truth. The dealership's transformation was just one ripple. Within months, other companies took notice. Calls flooded my office. Leaders wanted to replicate our model, our audits, our programs. But my message to each of them was simple. You can't replicate integrity. You have to build it. My phone rang endlessly. Interviews, podcasts, talk shows. People applauded my courage, but my courage was never the point. The point was that I had to pretend to be someone else. A janitor, invisible, voiceless, to be believed. That the experiences of thousands of Black women were only validated because mine happened on camera. The point was the quiet racism that doesn't make headlines, the everyday humiliations we've accepted as normal, the biases we've learned to navigate just to survive. When the spotlight faded, I refused to let our momentum fade with it. The Listening Project expanded nationwide, providing platforms for voices long unheard. Customers, employees, students, they spoke, and companies listened, not because it was easy or comfortable, but because ignoring injustice was becoming harder than confronting it. And yet, even with victories, I couldn't forget the woman who'd left our showroom humiliated that day. Her quiet dignity, her silent pain, her story was the loudest echo of all. It reminded me of why this fight had to continue. One day, after a speech at a community center, a teenage girl approached me, hesitant but determined. She asked quietly, "Do you ever get tired of fighting?" I paused before answering. "Yes, but I get more tired of staying quiet." She smiled softly, eyes bright with understanding. "Then I won't stay quiet either." I carried her words with me, because they were hopeful. Not distant, not abstract, but tangible and powerful. Hope born from seeing someone like herself stand up and refuse silence. Hope multiplied with each new voice that said, "Me too." Hope echoed because one person refused to accept things as they were, and that was all it took. Just one person willing to speak the truth. One person willing to risk rejection, humiliation, and discomfort to make something better. Now, it was time for more voices. Your voice. Because silence is acceptance, and acceptance maintains injustice. We can't afford to look away anymore. I'm sharing my story, so you'll share yours, so you'll challenge what you know isn't right, so you'll question, confront, and refuse to accept racism disguised as ignorance or humor. My undercover journey started quietly, but it didn't end that way. Now, my hope isn't hidden, it echoes loudly. Through me, through you, through every voice willing to speak truth to power. Because if we're loud enough, they won't be able to ignore us. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to Echoes of Hope Stories HQ. And in the comments, tell me, have you experienced or witnessed racism like this? Your voice matters.